Hey everyone, this is Disc Junkie, and welcome back to the Mancave of Madness. So today I'm starting out on the bottom floor for once, and this is because we are going to take a closer look at the sort of cage area of the man cave, or the entrance if you will. So we're gonna walk up the stairs, and this is something that I haven't really done. I think it's been pretty much a year since I talked about this. The cage area is something which was a really big video. This is something that I made in September of 2022, where we essentially installed this really elaborate cage construct, just redesigning the entire staircase. And sorry if you hear some noise in the background, but that is essentially my washing machine that's doing some sort of cycle. But in any case, we're actually going to get away from this noise. We're gonna go up the stairs right away. So let me just go ahead and put the camera and allow us access to the staircase. And coming up the stairs, you will see quite a familiar view. You can see that I still have the cage in all its glory, but we have actually installed a couple of posters on the walls, or the cage walls, and we're gonna get back to these in a minute. So just coming up the stairs, I still have my little restriction sign, which essentially says that, it's unauthorized access for anyone to photograph or, shoot videos or whatever. So yeah, this is just a fun sign, but I think it's really striking. I think this is essentially a really old sign from the 1940s, which I found at a flea market, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in the old video. But I wanted to talk about is that I've installed these posters on the cage wall, and we are going to film these, but I'm actually going to go upstairs and just take a reverse look at this. So here you can see I essentially bought a bunch of these frames, which were on sale. I got these at a Swedish store which is called Clas Ohlson, and it's sort of like a hobby store, I suppose. So I got these frames, they were half off, and I decided to just buy quite a large array of frames. So we essentially have two over here, and you can see these are these classic Crime Weekly Veckans Brott magazines, which I collect. Just love the cover art on these, and very similar to sort of damsel in distress and these really flashy sort of headlines. See if we can film this without too much glare. And so I have three on this side, right over there. That's pretty much as far as I could go, because any further than that, I'm not actually going to be able to reach to mount them. So it became a natural way to sort of stop mounting them at that point. But you can also see that I've actually mounted a whole bunch of posters in the actual staircase. And these are fairly interesting, so I thought we would actually film these just a little bit. And this is posters that I essentially had in the man cave before. You can see that I have some classic Texas Chainsaw Massacre posters here. This is actually quite rare posters, to be honest. This is a Studio S poster, which came out at one of the anniversaries. This is the 40-year anniversary of the movie, where they essentially re-released the film on DVD and Blu-ray. And I was also a part of actually making this cover design look the way it looked, because there was this whole thing where they were using a chainsaw on the cover, which wasn't the actual saw used in the movie or the right model. And I sort of contacted them to talk about this because I had some sort of personal connections with the people who worked at this company who were releasing it, Studio S. And we started talking, and it essentially ended up that I sort of helped them through my connections to actually get someone to photograph the correct version of the saw in that particular angle, and actually got them to replace the saw on the cover in the last minute. So for this particular release with this cover art, there's actually a small side note on the bottom of the back where it actually has a personalized thank you to me and this other guy. His name is Connor Deleuze, so essentially just thanking us for the help with the cover. So it's kind of cool to know that I had essentially a part of making this cover look the way it looked. Not taking any sort of major, I don't think this was super important, but it meant a lot to me that I was able to actually influence this and make it look the way it looked. Plus, I think it's a great poster art. And this was essentially a promotional poster, which you couldn't really buy. This was something that I think only became available for stores possibly, or maybe they used it to market it, but it's not really something you could order. So I was able to acquire this as part, sort of like a thank you for helping out. I sort of asked them, like, do you have any promotional material? And they sent me this for free. So it's pretty cool. I'm really happy to have acquired this, because getting Swedish posters for Texas Chainsaw is actually really, really unusual. And even more unusual than this one is the one above it, which is actually an original 1986 promotional poster for the movie, essentially based on the American print, but you can see that there is a small red little sort of sticker or stripe on it at the top, which essentially says, warning, may not be rented out to people under the age of 18. But so it's essentially a replication of the Swedish VHS cover at the time, which is also a really, really rare release. And this is actually a really limited print. It was actually limited to 100 copies only. I think the way it works is that if you had a video store back in 1986 and you rented out a particular number of copies or ordered a particular number of copies of VHS tapes to be rented out for this movie, you would receive like a free promotional poster with your order, like the video store received it. So you couldn't really buy this as a, you know, private individual. But I was able to find this not particularly expensive, actually. A couple of years back, I stumbled over this at Tradera, which is the Swedish equivalent of eBay, and I've honestly never seen another copy of this. This is the only print I've ever seen, so I'm really happy to have this. It's an absolutely legendary piece for Swedish collectors, I think, and I don't think a lot of people know about it. So yeah, this is a super important print for me, especially, you know, on account of my love for Texas Chainsaw and its Swedish history. This is just really remarkable, and one of those items which I didn't even know existed until I just stumbled over it one day. Now, looking at the rest of the prints here, we have some really interesting posters, which I'm sure I've talked about in the past. Here's another Texas Chainsaw inspired one. This is a Leatherface print, which is done by a really talented artist who's called Danny Miller, and he has also designed the other ones here, which is essentially one poster for Phantasm and another one which I can never remember the title of, but this is essentially like a fantasy poster which has all of these really cool movie guns in the background. And I just love this print. I just think it's a really cool thing with a whole bunch of little details. So it's one of those posters you can stare at for a while and you keep noticing new things, like sort of recognizing like where the guns are from. So just to give some examples, you got like, there's like a Watchman gun, you have the Robocop gun, there's a Conan sword, there's a Kill Bill sword, and just a bunch of these little homages to various movies, which I think is a really, really fun and well-designed print. Plus, I mean, it's an amazing artist, so I just think it's a really cool poster in general. Then over here we have the Turn-o-Matic, which is a really odd piece that I found at a flea market a while back. I think I documented this. And so this is one of these really old sort of turnstile things which you would use to change numbers in like a queuing system. It essentially has a light bulb in it which I haven't really wired up, so this doesn't really work, but I'm sure I could rewire it if I want to. But I just mounted this here because I think it's such a really curious contraption of this like very physical turnstile thing to make it change the numbers. So extremely vintage and cool, and actually quite collectible, I think. I forget what I paid, but I'm pretty sure that it was a really, really good deal, actually. So, in any case, let's return to the upstairs and look a little bit more at these frames which we were talking about. Because I have 2 on this side, and then I have 3 on this side. But what you may not notice is that I actually have 3 more on the opposite side. So I've actually hung these, you know, at exactly the same place, which I thought worked out really, really well. And this is essentially something I did simply because when I hung these, I realized that, oh, well, if you hang frames like this, then the back are going to be showing on the other side, which is just really, really boring and makes it look really, really unprofessional. But then I managed to actually hang these, you know, covering each other. So we have covers on each side, which I thought was really, really cool. And we can actually start over here where we have one more frame actually, because here you can actually see the back and sort of the solution I made for hanging these. So this was very much a do-it-yourself solution. You can see I got some metal pieces there, just homemade brackets to make this stick. Because even using like simple S-hooks or whatnot, it's actually really hard to make the frames go as close to the base as you want to, because if you think about it, hanging one frame is easy because then you can access it. You can just use like zip ties or whatever to tie it to the right place. But when you hang the second frame, you can't access the backside anymore because you already have a frame there. So yeah, I actually went with this very, very strange little contraption, which you can see here, where I essentially just have a metal piece which I, put together with a little, screw and a lug nut, and it just became this whole thing, which was just really, really specific, just to make sure that these things came together as tightly as possible and essentially sort of falls into place on their own and sort of get the same height. But it's it's actually a lot more complicated than you would imagine. So I'm rambling, but here is another print from the Veckans Brott series, another one of these really cool classic detective mag covers. And on the same topic of detectives and police, we actually have a bit of a police section over here, which I think I might have talked about in the past, in the previous video, because we did have this set up, but it wasn't as complete as it is now. So just starting from the top, we have some of these really old crime journals, which is called Nordic Crime Chronicles, or Nordisk Kriminalkrönika in Swedish. So these range all from the, let's see what it is. It starts in 1970 and goes all the way to 1998, essentially one volume per year. And this is a chronicle which talks about solved murder cases and crime cases in Sweden through these dates. So it's a really interesting library, and I essentially got this for free at a flea market a while back, which is also something I talk about in my secondhand sickness series. So I'm sure you know about this, and you can go back to see if you want to know more about them. So maybe not too interesting, but I really like the look of them, and it's one of those archives which I think have a very sort of vintage and nostalgic feel to them. Plus I love sort of the true crime talking in general, so I was really happy to add these to the collection. I mean, it's free, so what are you gonna do? Then we have some classic videotapes of very sort of crime and police themes. So these are essentially classic cop movies or movies about crime. And for the most part, I just pick stuff that I really like the covers for. So it's not like these have to be like the best films of all time or anything. I just tend to go with covers that I think look cool and sort of fit the theme of crime movies and stuff like that nature. Then over here, we essentially have some other cop classics. These are the Swedish films, which were part of the Martin Beck series, which is this sort of generic cop series where they're kind of like the Bond series, where you will have a particular actor making the same character throughout the years. Like this character of Martin Beck is a bit sort of like a B-movie cop thing that they made for TV, and throughout the years he has been portrayed by various actors. So this is I think one of the mid sort of era versions where he is portrayed by Gösta Ekman, really famous Swedish actor. And so I have a couple of these different ones on videotapes. These aren't really collectible by any means, but I got them for free actually, I think, in one of these bundle VHS boxes, so I decided to display them here because I really do like the coherence of the covers. And then at the bottom we got some other generic cop movies. Then we have a stand here which is actually broken, which you might hopefully not be able to tell. There used to be another acrylic stand at the top here, which I removed because it was cracked, and I think still looks okay, but I had to sort of rearrange some of the arm pieces or whatever so it actually looks more complete. And this is obviously a display for some of these vintage magazines. These are from a series which is called FIB-Aktuellt, kind of like early Playboy. So there's primarily articles, as you can see. It's not like it's a full-on like pornographic mag. I would describe it as sort of early Playboy, like these sort of sensational articles about sports and stuff like that. And then there's also like a centerfold, but not particularly explicit, to be honest. I mean, we're talking sort of 1970s. This is 1969 actually, but here you can just see some of the general design on these. And there's still fairly clothes in these. There are some nudie shots where you will have bare breasts on the covers, but it's usually not more than that. At least not until the sort of magazine progresses in its history and moves into the like 90s and so on. So yeah, but it's a really classic magazine in Sweden, so I'm sure people will know what this is. Then we have actually a small display of, there's this white porcelain elephant, which I got a few years back. I know it's really tacky. My girlfriend feels like, you know, why do you have that? It's just not really cool in any way. But I don't know, I just think that it's an interesting piece. Makes me think of Twin Peaks, sort of, I don't know. But I got it for free and I couldn't really pass it up. And yeah, it's just this fairly tacky, but to me still interesting looking. You know, when they're white, I think they're actually have quite an interesting design to them. I've seen a lot of these with various colors that are just really elaborate, and then I think they look a lot more cringy or cheesy or whatever. But these pure white ones I think can actually be quite aesthetic. So I essentially decided to keep this and actually placed a Cartman figure on top. And this is also a fairly interesting story. I found this Cartman during one of our vacations. I think we were at the Canary Islands or something, and I found this at a tourist shop, decided to buy it. And the thing is that you can see that Cartman is actually dressed up as this little old lady, which has its own explanation. But if you haven't seen this, this is relating to an episode, I think quite early in the series. Might be able to add this in the description. So essentially what it is that you have this episode about the Mexican staring frog, and they're trying to shoot this homemade video where Cartman is supposed to represent this old woman, so that's why he's dressed up with a wig and all that. And then they're gonna sort of film the Mexican staring frog and then film Cartman essentially fainting because this frog stares at him and then you faint or you die. I forget, whatever it is. But this is a clip which literally lasts like 2 seconds. It's basically him preparing, and then you just have a quick shot of the frog and filming him in these clothes, and he just sort of goes like, eh, and faints. One of my favorite clips for many, many years, you know, we watched Southpark for quite a long time in the past, and I always fell in love with this particular clip. Always made me laugh. And so we saw this in the tourist shop. I picked it up. I had it for many years. And then I put it in the box, got sort of lost in the move or whatever. I found it in the box when we were clearing out some stuff, and I'm like, here's a Cartman figure, which had been lost for so many years. And then I decided to actually look this up. And as it turns out, this particular figure is actually really unusual now. I see these go for quite a bit of money on eBay because it seems like this is just a really unusual figure. And looking at the various Cartman figures or Southpark figures in general, I just think that this is probably the most high quality version I've seen, just in terms of the design. It just looks really, really good. And they've really sort of captured Cartman's look and like the face. Like a lot of the time when you will see plushies or figures of this nature, I feel that it's always hard to capture the Southpark characters in making them look like you would imagine they look in 3D, because, you know, obviously the Southpark series as well as Simpsons, you know, it's a TV show, so sort of making those figures into 3D figures sometimes is not going to look particularly good, like not what you imagine. But for this one, I think they just really, really nailed it, and it's just such a super cute and awesome figure. I just love him. So I was really happy to find him and add him to the collection, especially realizing that he actually fetches quite a bit of a value these days. So that is actually really cool. So in any case, let's just move on to the rest of the room. And after a bit of a zoom out, you can see that I actually have a old theater chair here, which is obviously something we have talked about in the past. I got these for free. There's one in this room and one in the other room as well. But this was a free pickup that I made years ago. I made a video about this as well. I think it was one of the earlier Mancave Madness videos. And then I also have one of these red lights here in the background, which is actually turned off, but we can actually turn that on just for show. So there we have this cozy light, which I believe was actually in this corner in the previous video, or in the old cage video. And I also added this shelf here. This was not present in the first video I made about the cage. So these have sort of been switched around. And you will also recall that in the place of this theater chair in the old video, I had a cabinet, or a glass cabinet, where I had various toys on display. This has essentially been moved into one of the other rooms. This is residing in the quote-unquote red room at the moment. But aside from that, I have also put up this new bookshelf, which expands on an idea I had in the old video where I wanted to make this TV tower. And you can see that I've actually stacked up a couple of these old TV monitors and essentially made an entire shelf for this. And this is also a custom shelf, which was originally based on not a 40 centimeter shelf, which is what you might think because it looks like that, but 40 centimeters ends very close to the edge here and was essentially one of these things which was really close to what I needed. But as it turns out, you can't really fit your common TV into a 40 centimeter size shelf. And you can also see that I've essentially removed the backing of this. So this whole thing was a custom piece. I cut this down from an 80 centimeter shelf. I had to add like the side bolts to keep some of the sort of shelves in place, make sure that it doesn't collapse from the weight. And then I just essentially removed the backing to it. So there's a whole lot of sort of wiring and stuff sticking out just to make the sort of lights work and whatever. But yeah, just to look a little bit at these televisions, because televisions is a really big part of my collecting now. I essentially have some of these monitors. This first one is a Funai machine. It has a built-in VCR, and I gotta be honest, I forget now, but I'm pretty sure this is the one that's working. I think this has a working VCR portion. Then we have the white one. This is also a Funai machine, so quite similar. And this was a free pickup, but I believe this is actually totally defective. I don't think the VCR works and not the monitor either. You know, this was a freebie and I just liked the look of it. So for display purposes, I decided to pick this up and keep it because white televisions aren't really as common as the more sort of typical gray ones. Then moving upwards, we have a really interesting television, which was a gift from my dad. He's had this for a couple of years. I haven't had my eyes on it because I thought it looked really cool. This is a SABA television, and it's something that was designed by a guy that I think is called Starck. I don't know if you can see the logo anywhere. Well, I might as well leave a video description for like the Wikipedia page or whatever on this TV, because it's a really interesting piece and it's made from recycled material, as you can see, sort of like recycled wood. I don't know how they made this. I think this is essentially like kind of like sawdust that's been glued together and molded into a specific shape. So it's just a really, actually kind of an ugly piece to a lot of people, but I just think that this is such a weird piece and it's really striking and just really sets a different tone than all of these sort of simple plastic ones. And I really like the idea of having like the different color variations, like you got the gray, the white, and then like the sawdust. And then above this, I actually move over to some smaller TVs, which is also a really, really big passion for me right now. So I have these TV and radio combos here, for example, which is some of my favorites at the moment. So this is actually a miniature TV, and then you also have, you can switch it, and you have like little radio dials and stuff which moves, and it's just, I just love the weirdo retro future look of this. Feels like something that you're gonna find in like the Alien universe or some of these classic 80s sci-fi. It's just a really, really cool and interesting kind of design to me. And then I also have some of the more simple or more common mini televisions that you would find, like stuff people would have in campers and things like that. So this is a really, really small one from Soundcraft, and I think this has like one of the more interesting things on the back. Let's see if I can find this. I don't want to drop it, and I'm not sure if you can even make this out. Yeah, here it is. Check the bottom of this. Here it actually says America's Best, fuck the rest. I don't know, but this looks like it's actually an original Soundcraft sticker, which is so weird. First time I've ever seen someone use that kind of language to market a television. Because yeah, this is actually a Soundcraft television. So I don't think that sticker was like a homemade sticker. I think it's actually an official Soundcraft sticker, which is really, yeah, quite an edgy slogan, to say the least. But above that, we have a Roadstar television, and then we have one which is from Top Sonic. This Top Sonic one is also really, similar to Red in shape and size. This Roadster or Roadstar, I keep confusing those, is quite a bit longer, sort of an elongated television. But yeah, so I'm really happy with this TV setup. It really is an interesting tower, but I tend to buy more and more of these little miniature televisions. So I will probably sort of redesign or reconstruct this to add some new televisions as time progresses. But in any case, let's move over to looking at the VHS wall that I got on here, and I think this is pretty much unchanged from previously when I made the previous video, but we might as well take a brief look at it in case you don't remember or if I wasn't detailed enough. So we have a couple of, or well, actually quite a few copies of the Ninja Mission, which is this classic Swedish film, so I am using duplicates of this. So we got Ninja Mission here, Ninja Mission, Ninja Mission, Ninja Mission. Let's see what it is. This is another ninja movies, and there's a lot of ninja movies here just because I think they generally have really cool covers. It's such a classic 80s, you know, figure or characters to say just ninja movies were really popular at this particular point in time. So I really like to use this as a display because I just generally like the covers. Got some more ninja movies here. Ninja Mission again, Ninja Mission, Ninja Mission. Then we added some more sort of martial arts style stuff. So we got Kill Bill, the 2 Kill Bill boxes from Japan. These are the DVD box sets. And then you have some other movies with similar stuff, just people in hoods or mysterious sort of ninja inspired stuff. We have the New York Ninja box set from Vinegar Syndrome. We got a Old Boy VHS, which I think is, I'm gonna say Korean. Sorry if I'm mistaken, but I think it's Korean. Then we have some more sort of martial arts or ninja type movies. A lot of the time I just go by the cover because I think they look really cool. And then we have some other stuff which is completely unrelated to ninja, so it's not like it's a purely ninja wall. I've just, you know, went with covers I like that so I should probably update this, but I tend to forget about it. So I think this is pretty unchanged from the original video on the cage that I made. But in any case, we got Torso, Running Man VHS, then we got some Alien tapes down here. This is a Swedish one. Then we got Alien 3 from Japan, another Japanese one for Aliens, and then an original Swedish one for Alien. I think these are actually empty. Yeah, Alien 3 and Alien 1 are actually empty. Those would be way more valuable if they had the tape, but they are essentially empty. Then we have a hardware VHS, Lady Stay Dead, Inseminoid, and Squirm right at the bottom. So let's just keep this going and look at the rest of the room in its entirety. And this is where a whole lot of stuff has happened in terms of the interior design. You've also noticed this little trolley here in the corner, which is a new acquisition. And this doesn't really have any particular purpose. I essentially placed it here simply because I didn't know what to do with it. And right now it is essentially just housing some various titles of stuff that I am, intending to sell or don't really know what to do with. So these really aren't particularly interesting to anyone, I think. Here are some of the moldy tapes that I featured in one of my secondhand sickness videos just a little while back. And yeah, so not really any particular interest or thought behind this at the moment. This is just the best I could do with this. Put up these new posters because if you remember in the old Mancave clip back when we were talking about the cage, I essentially had the posters from the staircase were positioned on these walls here, and I always thought that they were a bit too large for that format, or they didn't really fit because I didn't really have anything else on this wall. But as you can see, I've now installed this small little shelf here, which is essentially a couple of these bestow cabinets, which are typical IKEA furniture that you can get, these open cabinets. You can get them with the doors or whatever as well, but I decided to go with just plain open shelves here. And these essentially have just a bunch of knickknacks in them. There's like some vintage toys, and then I have these big old rental boxes. So this is a rentable DVD player, and then we have a rentable VCR in that box as well. So sort of various eras of the same thing, just these rentable machines that you could get at the video stores for playing videotapes and DVDs, obviously. And I see these boxes have essentially moved a bit out of the way, so sorry about that. Being a perfectionist, you're just gonna move those back. So here's just some general knickknacks, and not everything is movie related, but you might recognize these as some items that I've talked about over the years, just various car boot sale finds and things of that nature. But then on top here we have a Minority Report promo box set, which was a video store exclusive. Like this would be sent to video store owners as promotion, and I've made a detailed video on this that you can look up. Then we have some Johnny 5 or short circuit models, which are actually radio controlled. I've made videos on these as well. And yes, I am well aware that he doesn't have his top eyebrows, but yeah, they were just impossible to mount and kept falling off, so I decided to not mount them. But I have similar figures here. So we have the regular Johnny 5 and then we have the punk variation on this side. And a lot of people have asked me about this. I think the video I made on these, one of my most popular videos ever, tend to come back with comments like, where do you buy these? And also the fact that he doesn't have any eyebrows. But just to put it straight, these were bought on eBay, but they're not available from the same seller anymore. I think you can probably find these now because I think there's a lot of people out there who have made new versions. And there's also some really good groups on Facebook. So if you want to learn more about how to find these particular types of models or something like it, I would advise you to check Facebook groups and search for stuff like Johnny 5 or Short Circuit. I think just search for Johnny 5 Robot or something like that. I think you will find Facebook groups that talk a lot about model making and these particular types of models. So in any case, then we have some homemade lamps here, which I've also been struggling to find a place for in the man cave. But these are essentially these classic IKEA lamps, and then I actually took a old trailer reel for Alien 3 and I just cut this up. So if you go in close, you will see that this essentially has actual frames from the movie. I don't know if you can actually focus on this, but hopefully you can see some of it. So this was just a fun little DIY project that I was working on, and I think it really came out nicely. Just gives a really cozy glow, if you ask me. And then directly above it, we actually have some brand new posters, which I'm so happy about. And this is something which I have to spend a little bit of time to talk about. These are original 1980s billboards, or I'm not really sure what they're called, maybe like one-page ads or front page. It's like the stuff that you see at newsstands where they're sort of advertising the latest news from a particular magazine. And I'm just going to call them billboards because I don't really know what the actual word is. So 1980s billboards, which were used for Veckans Brott, Crime Weekly, the magazine I collect, the same magazine that you will see on these framed posters. And the other one is for FIB-Aktuellt, which is the other magazine that we talked about, which was in the little stand over there, in case you can make it out through the cage. So I was super excited to find these because I think that these headlines are just so hilarious and a lot of times. So I bought a stack of these. It didn't cost me too much, but this was the first time I've ever seen them. I've never really seen, you know, in particular the Crime Weekly billboards or something. I've never come across. So I think that FIB-Aktuellt is much more common because they made a much more massive run. I think they were, you know, much more sensational and much more common to market these. I don't think that Veckans Brott would have the same marketing in terms of the mass, but I don't know. It's just, you know, I've never seen these. So I essentially managed to mount or frame these, which was also really hard to do because it is actually quite the uncommon format. So what I did is that when I purchased all these frames that were on sale at Clas Ohlson, I found these ones, which I think are pretty perfect if you have like your typical daybill posters for theater, because these posters tend to be a bit longer, but these are not the same format. So what I did, which I think worked out brilliantly, is that if you look closely, I've essentially printed a black border which is the same width or the same size as the frame itself. So this is a wooden frame, but then I have a black border which is printed on paper, and then I printed my own logo. I essentially scanned the magazine logo, replicated that, and I essentially made up my own tagline, which is something that was featured to some extent on the covers. Like, it's sort of like their official tagline, which just says "En tuff tidning för fullvuxna," that would translate to "a tough magazine for the fully grown," which, I don't know, it's a bit innuendo about being fully grown, like it's a sexual whatever. So I essentially stole the logo and the tagline, and then I just reprinted this to make it sort of like a byline, kind of like logo. So I made this for Veckans Brott, but I also made it for FIB-Aktuellt, and this is something that I essentially went with a completely made up tagline. So I just printed the logo, but I wanted to get a very sort of similar design to this. So then I just made up my own tagline, which would be the magazine with the hottest news. I just thought that was, I don't know, it works. It was the best I could come up with at the time. So this is an original sort of design. I just took the logo, tried to match a similar tagline with like the italics, sort of slightly skewed font. And so talking a little bit about the actual headlines. I mean, if you speak Swedish, you obviously know what this says. But just for those of you who don't speak Swedish, I can essentially talk a little bit about what these headlines mean. So for this one, we have like the sensational images. This is where you see the killer run away. This talks about the famous murder of Sweden's prime minister back in the 80s, who was Olof Palme. So here you can read that it actually says, this is where Palme's killer is running away, and then big exclamation point. And there's a lot of stuff like this, which is just very speculative, where it just says everything about sex and a big exclamation point. So this magazine, like I said, was very early Playboyish and very focused on sex and stuff of that nature. It's a men's magazine. And this was also similar, but this was in its core a detective magazine. But it also has a lot of stuff about sex. So just some examples of the sort of headlines here. We have like this one just says, shock reading, the teenage girl was raped by her parents. Then we have Puritanian laws will end up with more sex crimes. And then this is personal favorite because it's so bizarre. This one says, McDonald's burger triggered a murder massacre. And it's just, I love the fact that it's so sort of, it's so just all over the place. Exclamation mark, is so sort of crazy and bizarre and sexual and sensational news, which I love. This is just super crazy, which is also so much about why I love the covers, because there's always, big headlines, colors, exclamation mark. It's just so in sort of line of what the time was when these were trying to sell sort of magazines. And then we also have here, sex crazy girls seeking you, exclamation point. So yeah, well, let's just move over to look. Here is the third one, also from Crime Weekly. So I tried to position them to give a sort of coherent view. Like I got two of these, and sort of every other one I went with, so Veckans Brott, FIB-Aktuellt, and Veckans Brott again, just trying to do a bit of symmetry in here, and I think it really works. So just quickly, here we got something about mob princesses living a luxury life in hell. We have sexual contacts with special photos, and yada yada. So then over here, some more posters before we continue. These are also from FIB-Aktuellt. So here we have another one of these really sort of sensational headlines. So this reads, biker gang makes their own porn flick. Hell's Angels meet the porn stars. And then it's like 16 pages of extremely naughty images. Over here is, let's see, this is more sort of typical and simple, I suppose. This one says, new giant issue. We offer you a full view. And then we have like 16 hot pages about sex. And then it just says zip. So yeah. So this wasn't as common from the billboards I found, actually having like a photograph on the cover. Most of them were just like really big headlines. But I decided to keep going with this sort of theme of using the boards. And here you can see that, it's not perfect. You can see that there is some slight lines where, I didn't really manage to cover it, because this was really sort of exact. And you can also see on this side, like, there is some white there, because this was a very sort of exactly format. So I really had to sort of position this with like some tape on the back and really making them stick exactly where they're supposed to be. So hopefully they won't sort of be dispositioned. Also, like, the formats in general were not exact. Like this one, which is from the same series, like this is completely different, just missing like half centimeter or something. So yeah, but generally I think it really works. It doesn't really look too bad unless you go in close and really sort of examine them. So I'm really happy with this overall design. And we can actually check, because we have one more over here which I tend to forget. So this is another one from FIB-Aktuellt, And I'm really sorry about the lighting, because this one is way in the back and it's like the worst lighting. This one is also the most explicit, essentially a nudie shot, so might just keep it at that and not go into too close on it. So we still have a little bit of stuff left. Here's essentially another part of this VHS wall. I'm pretty sure that I did show this in the previous video, because I think we did set this up when we were talking about the cage the first time. But just in case you forgot, this is essentially a continuation of the wall from the other side. And I really think that this works amazingly well, because these two walls are, you know, they are aligning. So I love the fact that I was able to close this off so perfectly with these shelves, because they really do blend into the wall, which I think is really, really nice. Because this is one of those rooms which was really hard to design in terms of how you're going to use the shelves, because I really needed the walls in this room to hang some of these posters, because I really love poster arts, but I just tend to always, you know, use the room I got for shelves, because I really need like the shelving space. So I am really happy with how this turned out, and really sort of allowing myself to hang posters for once, because it, you know, it's one of those things which I tend to not do, and I'm just really, really happy with how this turned out. And I don't know if we need to talk about these movies specifically, but I will give you a slow pan of them just to show you the titles that are in these shelves. But I think this is something that I showed in the previous video, and so I don't really think I need to talk about each individual title, but well, now at least you have seen them one more time. And then lastly, I think we can just talk about these posters or magazines that are on the reverse side of the frames that we saw in the cage entrance. So over here I decided to go with the Feedback Duel. So this is the other magazine that you've seen the billboards for. And these are going to be a bit hard to film, because I keep having the lighting in the, you know, background. So hopefully this works out okay. So here we have another Feedback Duel with a fairly innocent looking girl on the cover, though she is actually fairly naked. This is not as... And now my washing machine is just telling me that it's done, so yeah, let's just wait for that to... Yeah, I know. Okay. So where was I? These are Feedback Duel magazines, and here is the first one of my favorites in terms of one I have, because it's just a very sort of sexual tension kind of cover, but it's also fairly innocently shot, and that is, you know, not an explicit cover. I just think it's a very classic and beautiful shot. So this is from 1969, and then the next one is actually not a cover, so a bit of a confusion here, but this is actually a mirror. This is something I found at a flea market, and this is a promotional mirror, I would assume, for the magazine. So this is a replication of a cover art. You can see that they are very similar, but it is essentially a mirror. So you just have the Feedback Duel headline, and then you have this made up little sort of byline or whatever, you get what it is. So literally this just says Feedback Duel, so it's the magazine, shows you the image of Sweden's greatest lover. And then there's a quote saying, "The women are crazy about me." And then obviously, you know, you have the mirrored image. So it's like, yeah, you make your own cover, like, oh, okay, I am Sweden's greatest lover. So yeah, I found it funny and quite unusual. So this is a mirror which I actually reframed. So this had an original wooden frame, but I repurposed it using some of these metal frames. So I wanted to get all these frames to match, so they were exactly the same size. But I think it came out pretty well. If you go in close, you will see that it's not 100% the same size, but I think it really works, and I just really like this idea, so I wanted to display it. And then lastly, we have one more issue. Here is another model. This one is very much clothes, actually, in like this winter outfit. So generally, when you're talking about displaying sort of erotic magazines or men's magazines, I always really like to go for like the less is more approach, if you will. I really don't want to post anything too explicit, but I really do feel like these early covers where you have much more focus on photography, like not having the explicit shots or the, you know, full-on nudes or the cover, I just think these display really well and give a really sort of classy but still sensual piece of art to hang on the wall. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. I do like to display more erotic stuff as well, but for this particular section I just went with some of the most sort of wholesome stuff I could find. And with that, I think we are actually closing in on the end of this video. One more thing to mention is that this room has been really difficult to light in general. I mean, I have my main light hanging in the staircase, which is essentially connected to my regular light switch on the wall. Then I have these lights, which are just essentially a warm, cozy light. But for the rest of the room, I don't really have any lights that are connected to like the regular wall switches. I do have the option to do this for at least one more light, but I haven't found a light which I think fitted this room. And usually I tried to put some stuff up, but it just became too bright and very sort of blinding to the room. So what I did now is that I actually repurposed some of these LED lights, which are pretty modern. I purchased these at also, I think actually the same store. So this is also from Clas Ohlson, and these are pretty cheap. I think you get them from like €8 a piece. They come with this little clamp to them and a really practical wire. So I actually just ran these to like the regular power socket in the wall. So I can essentially just turn these off if I want to. And this is actually really practical because for the most part, when I'm like shooting videos and I want like to showcase this room, then it's really practical to have full-on lighting. But for the most part, you know, when it's everyday life, I don't really need all of this display lighting. So then I just tend to go with like the regular light switch if you're just running up here, and that's just a single light, but it still lights up enough to see what you're doing. So I don't know, I might reconsider this whole thing, but for now I just placed like one of these clamp lights here and another one here, which you might not even realize was there, but there it is. So that's exactly the same model. And then of course there is the red light in the back, but this is more of a cozy light, so I'm actually going to turn that off again. So yeah, that is essentially it for this video. This has been a room which I have really been building on for quite a while. I know it's been like a year since I last made it. I want to mention that the cage is working fine. I'm really happy with it. The cats are really grown accustomed to it. They don't tend to try to run in here too often. It just happens every once in a while. But usually they are very much sort of okay with the fact that they're not allowed out here. It's become a really sort of natural part of, you know, how we handle them. So yeah, I mean, the cats are doing great. Steve is doing great. I am really happy with how this project turned out. Given that I've had this for a year now, I can just say that it works really well. And I think this project is a bit different. You might think that, you know, in the last video, I did have a lot of time lapses, and for this one, I haven't really done anything like that at all, because this has been a project which for the past year, I've just sort of been building on little by little, because I didn't really know what to do in here. So yeah, hope you thought that this walkthrough was fun, even without any sort of elaborate time lapse. But yeah, I'm really happy with the results, so I'm glad you stopped by. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think, because it is really inspiring to me to hear from you guys. But that's it. I want to say thank you very much for watching. Really hope you enjoyed it. And as usual, hope to see you all next time.